When you make mistakes, own the mistake and move on. I was the comms director reporting directly to the president, and then I made a mistake.
Anthony was a guy who worked for me, who really didn't have a clue. He worked for 11 days. He made terrible statements and gestures and everything to people that worked in the office. I'm not a fan of Anthony. I haven't been for a long time. I think Anthony is really somebody that's very much out of control.
There was a local kid whose father knew my dad for 50 years, an Italian-American. He grew up in a town next door to mine. Parents knew each other very well. I was getting to know him. I thought we were having an off-the-cuff, off-the-record conversation. I said a few things that I thought were funny. He was giggling, it was funny. The next morning he called me and said, okay, so I got all of that on tape and I'm walking over to CNN with all of it and I'm gonna be writing this explosive article about you in the New Yorker tomorrow.
He doesn't have what it takes. I mean, he really doesn't. He calls so much. He's a nervous, neurotic wreck. He calls so much. And I said, Anthony, I'm sorry. I can't take you in. And I said, you gotta stop all these phone calls. Too many calls, Anthony.
I said, well, if you do that, you're gonna get me fired. I mean, why would you be that transactional? Our families know each other a long time. You know, we could build a very long-term relationship. I didn't realize that I was on the record. Well, you didn't say during the interview that you were off the record. I said, okay, you got me. You know, if you're gonna play that sort of gotcha journalism, I'll end up losing my job. It'll end your relationship with me. Do you wanna be this transactional? He said he did. I made a mistake. I'm an old hustler with a young attitude. That's what I am. I'm an old hustler with a young attitude. Remember what Coco Chanel said? You get the face that you deserve when you're 50. Be a nice person and like be happy and like cool. Otherwise, if you have like a nasty, mean-spirited face, you're gonna have all these kind of like frowning wrinkles that not even the Botox can cure. Like Trump had like a great life. I don't know if this was the best move to go become president. Is that bad? Is that so bad? Okay.
Anthony Scaramucci, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
Excellent. So tell me a bit about your life growing up.
I was born in Mineola Hospital in like central Nassau County, Long Island. Grew up in a small house in that town, a middle-class Italian-American, blue-collar community. I would never dishonor my dad by telling you I grew up poor. I did not. He was a very hard worker, and he gave us a tremendous life. But you know, when times were tough financially in the 70s, and people were getting cut back a little, we felt a little bit of that pinch. And so, you know, I had my first paper out when I was 11, and I was hustling papers all over Port Washington for 3 years and gave most of that money to my mom, you know, and so that was, it was a fun experience for me. I learned a lot about myself, learned about how to sell. I don't think it's anything distinguishing, frankly, but the truth of the matter is I loved it.
Being in that financial pinch, do you think the desire to meet your family's needs was sort of what birthed the entrepreneur in you?
Sometimes what happens is like anything that goes on in your life between 11 and say 20 or 11 and 19, that sort of impressionable time in your life, what you're doing during that period of your life, if you're really gonna find your dream and your bliss, so to speak, you'll start doing that for work. And for me, that was like selling and meeting people. And you know, I used to go to the residential apartment area called the Dolphin Green Apartments in my hometown, and I would take a stack of free papers and I would drop them off at every doorstep. And then the next day I'd knock on the door, and you know, everyone would just have their names on there, say, hey, Mrs. Donahue, how are you? I'm the local newspaper boy. I just gave you free paper yesterday. Did you enjoy the paper? And before she could say whether she did or didn't, I'd say, so are you gonna sign up, you know, daily and Saturday or daily Saturday and Sunday? What do you want? You know, and I built the paper out like that, you know, and so that's how I got involved in entrepreneurship. Weird thing is I went to law school primarily due to financial anxiety. So I read this article in 1985 that they were paying lawyers at Cravath, Swaine & Moore $65,000 a year. I'm like, oh my God, that's like more money than my dad makes. So why don't I just go to law school? That'll take all the financial anxiety out of this thing. I can start my first year making $65,000 a year more than my dad. So, but I didn't really like it. So you learn about yourself. I'm at law school. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to be a lawyer. So I switched over to investment banking.
I went to law school for the exact same reason, as a matter of fact.
See that? See that? It's good education though, right? You finished and right?
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
got your law degree.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good education. I'm glad I did it. And it does one other thing actually, which I didn't realize at the time. It allows you to synthesize opposing ideas in your mind and accept the contrast between those ideas without, driving yourself crazy. So, I'm a pretty good guy to understand what's going on the left and the right, and can sort of feel and empathize with both of their points of view.
Going back to your sales career, I learned about your experience with Hood ice cream trucks. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, that was a disaster. So, I was overconfident. I had just gotten into Harvard Law School, feeling very smug about myself. I mean, just to give you a sense for the family I grew up in, when I called my mom and told her I was going to Harvard Law School, she was like, "You're going to Hartford Law School?" I said, no, not Hartford Law School, it's Harvard Law School. She's like, "Okay, where is it? It's in Hartford though, right?" I said, "No, Ma, it's not in Hartford." "Well, why would they name the thing Hartford Law School if it's not in Hartford?" This is like a Lou Costello, Bud Abbott situation, right? So, that was like a big joke. It still is. My mom's 82. We still joke about it. Yeah, I got my degree from Harvard Law School, Ma. But, my parents just didn't know. They didn't have any books in the house, really, and they didn't go to college. And so, in a weird way, that made it easier for me. I have to be honest, because there was no expectation, right? If I had gone to any law school, that would have been an accomplishment to my folks. So, it's the spring of my senior year at Tufts. I'm going to Italy, Nick. And so what I did was I rented a Hood ice cream truck. And that's like local up in the New England area, at the truck with the bells, and had Dove bars on the truck, and had a whole selection of different ice creams. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make money. I'm gonna do the marathon weekend. I went down to Wellesley, which was the midpoint of the marathon. I gave $200 to the Exxon station in Wellesley on their main street. All right, so I'm like sitting there. I got my thing plugged in so that the ice cream's not gonna melt. And I got there on Sunday. Sunday was a beautiful day, and I was selling ice cream out of that thing. I was feeling very smug. And then unfortunately on the big day, it was 40 degrees, and it was raining, and it was blisteringly cold. And I like telling people I didn't have any entrepreneurial hedge, okay? I had no coffee, I had no donuts or hot chocolate on the truck. All I had was like cold ice cream. And so I was in a total panic, okay? And I ended up losing about $2,300. So here I was, expecting to make $5,000 and take myself on a glorious trip through Europe. I ended up losing $2,500 at a time when I couldn't afford to lose it. And it's just a lesson in what your expectations are and what could go right and what could go wrong. So my Hood ice cream story was my first real entrepreneurial failure, frankly. So, you live and learn, right? You got to when you bounce, you got to bounce high. You can't be like a little piece of bone china, hit the floor and crack. You got to get up.
Got it. So you're in law school, you realize very quickly that this isn't the career path for you, and you start thinking about investment banking. Tell me sort of your journey to your first job there.
So now I'm in law school, and I'm trying to get a job in investment banking. I can't get a job. So I work in Southampton as a title closer. And so I was working as a title closer, and I was going to Goldman Sachs receptions in the summer, and I thought I was going to get a job with them my second year in school. I did not, so I ended up working for a real estate law firm in Midtown Manhattan. And then in December of 1988, I got a job offer from Goldman Sachs in their real estate department. And so I was very proud of that, because I was a little bit of that insecure kid, and I wanted to go to the cocktail party at Harvard Law School. I want to tell everybody at that cocktail party I'm the coolest guy. And so the coolest guy, of course, gets the coolest job. And at that time, Nick, the coolest job was to work in investment banking and to work in the real estate department, because they were two hot areas, and I fused them together. So I'm now the coolest person on the planet in my mind. And so I go to that cocktail party and bragging to everybody that I've got the best job. And lo and behold, I get smacked again. I absolutely sucked at that job. And so I got the job, stunk at the job, and then we went into a recession. I got my ass fired from that job on February 1st, 1991. It was a very depressing day. So Goldman gave me an $11,000 severance check, and I took the money, put it in my pocket. It was a Friday night. I went home, went for a jog on Saturday morning. I said, okay, I gotta find a job. So I got a couple rolls of quarters before there were cell phones. I went back into the city. I was living up in Westchester County, and I was pumping quarters into payphones and calling people. And finally, I got a hold of somebody. They said, hey, there's a job available I think you might be good at Goldman Sachs. I said, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. I just got fired from Goldman Sachs. Well, where? And they said, well, it's in the sales area. And so I said, oh my God, I might be able to stay at Goldman Sachs, right? So I called the guy that fired me. So learning lesson for young kids, be nice to people even when you're getting fired. I got blown out. What am I gonna do? Don't be a crybaby, right? So I called the guy that fired me. I'm like, hey, can you help me get this other job? I think I'd be better at that other job. It's more sales, more in line, Nick, with that paper route, and communications. Like, okay, yeah, no, I think you'd be good at that job. I'm gonna go upstairs and tell the guy to interview. So I went upstairs, they interviewed me, took about 3 weeks. I had to interview a lot of people. They gave me the job. Now, the woman, she was head of equities personnel for Goldman. So she calls me, she says, I got really good news for you. We're gonna just mark you down as interdepartmental transfer. You're never gonna have to tell anybody in a documentary or a TV show that you've been fired, okay? You're just gonna blow over that. We're gonna mark you down as interdepartmental transfer. I said, okay, that's great. She goes, can we get the $11,000 back, please? I said, no. I already spent the money. So you can tell everybody you want that I was fired. I said, I actually don't care.
Anthony, we know now, based on you being in the public eye, that you are an outspoken guy, but are there any stories of early in your career, like at Goldman, where your outspokenness shined?
Charles Lebowitz. His dad had owned these drive-in movie theaters throughout the southeastern part of the United States. And so those movie theaters were going by the wayside. And so he came up with the idea to create these residential shopping malls in these areas. And obviously before the internet, before Amazon, and they took off, they were very, very successful. So in maybe 92 or 93, he was taking that public. And so I got invited to see his roadshow presentation. And very accomplished guy, but sometimes you have lights and cameras on, or you have lots of people, people pull back. And so, I'm Italian. I got my media training at my Sunday dinner table, so I've never read me. So I was sitting in the audience, and he was talking, and I was watching all these Goldman Sachs bankers really flatter the guy, and be very sycophantic about him. And I raised my hand, and I said, I gotta be honest, this presentation sucks. And you're an unbelievable guy, and you're a visionary, and you're gonna be mad at me for telling you why it sucked, but you're reading facts and figures and numbers off of a piece of paper, but you have this amazing life story. And so I would so much rather you get up there and tell 3 great stories about your life. Let us at Goldman Sachs work on the facts and figures with the potential investors. You need to be reading those in this roadshow presentation. So that didn't help me with Goldman Sachs. Okay, they were mad at me. Okay, I broke ranks with them. They were overly flattering the guy. But help me with Charles Lebowitz. He loved me. He was like, okay, and this guy's telling me the truth. Totally improved his presentation. Stayed close to him and his family. Got money from them to invest. Well, I always tell people, don't be the sycophant, okay? Sycophancy is closer to self-preservation and selfishness. It's not loyalty, but you have to have enough self-confidence to tell people the truth.
Got that. Speaking of a guy who's often known for being himself, you first met Trump when you were at Goldman in the 90s. Tell us about that.
Yeah, he would never remember that. He was obviously Donald J. Trump at that time, larger-than-life figure even back then. He wrote the book Art of the Deal. I was probably 23, 24 when I read that book. And so obviously, Trump Tower and the majesty of his lifestyle we all knew about as kids. And so, obviously he was a guy that was a larger-than-life figure. So I met him, a real estate executive, and introduced me to him, Mike Fascitelli. Big impression on me, probably had absolutely no impression on him. I didn't really know him, so I would never say that we, had a relationship. But we then started trafficking in different situations, charity events or parties, and we ran into each other more than once. And then I started doing CNBC, he was on NBC with The Apprentice, and then we really did start intersecting more. He was always very friendly. He was a very gregarious guy, very charming. You could tell he was having a lot of fun with his life. He was living a very full, rich lifestyle.
So you're a middle-class kid, you're sensitive about making money, get fired from Goldman, you get rehired by Goldman, then you decide to leave. Tell me about that decision, what made you decide to do that?
Well, I mean, I always wanted to have my own business. You know, my grandfather was an auto mechanic, had a small repair shop. My other grandfather was a mason, he had a small masonry business. My dad really worked for the same companies, you know, as a worker, but my uncle had a motorcycle shop, and my cousins were in auto glass and collision and operating deli. So I'm really like from a family of small business people. So I didn't really ever felt that I fit into Goldman Sachs. I meet a guy named Andy Bozart. He's a couple years older than me. He wants to start his own business. He wants me to be his partner. We leave on December 1st, 1996. I'm 32 years old. I start my first business. Man, being an entrepreneur, if I knew how hard it was, I never would have done it, you know? And so, you know, you go from Goldman and you're in this little pod and they're taking care of your technology and they're taking care of your compliance and they're taking care of all the stuff for you. And then you're rejected. You have no brand. You're by yourself with your partner and you're in a little room and now you've got to worry about technology, worry about the Staples account, worry about a Pitney Bowes machine. I mean, give me a break. These Pitney Bowes machines to send mail are ridiculously expensive. I was like panicking over the Pitney Bowes machine. So I had a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of worry. What happens to me when this fails? Like, can I handle that embarrassment? Got that business up and running, had some ups and downs, but it was a bull market. And so we really benefited from the rising tide of market activity. We did pretty well. We ended up selling that business 5 years later to a company called Neuberger Berman. So I've had this odyssey from Goldman Sachs, my own business, my business gets sold, and then the business I sell to gets sold to Lehman Brothers. So I go from Goldman Sachs to Lehman Brothers. But I did not fit in there either. I went to Dick Fold, and after I got paid my bonus in 2005, I said I wanted to leave, start my own company. And so he was like, no problem. He gave me balance sheet capital to help me get started. Then I went to a couple of friends who I had made money for in the past, and they helped me put the business together. And then I left and started Skybridge. Originally started as a hedge fund incubator. So what I wanted to do is I raised a pool of capital. I wanted to give it out to managers and own a piece of those managers for my clients. The problem is we went into the financial crisis and most of those managers did not do well. One of those managers still survived. We own that piece. So now we're in the middle of the financial crisis and we're getting redemptions and withdrawals on our business, and then I threw the Hail Mary. I leveraged everything in my life, and I bought Citibank's fund to funds unit. And so it was 2009, and I went to the Citibank reception at the Belvedere Hotel. That reception was supposed to start at 6 o'clock. I got there at 5:15 because I knew those Citibank executives would get there early. So I walk in there, they're not quite ready, they're all setting up. And I introduced myself and said, listen, I want to buy this business, and I explained to him why. That moment helped me get that business.
One of the quotes that I know must have made you second guess, but obviously you dealt with it. I want to hear how you deal with it. Someone told you when you're starting Skybridge that not even a combo of Harry Houdini, the Easter Bunny, and Santa Claus could raise the money you're trying to raise and get in that business, and you should just quit now and before
I'm
you
going to tell you exactly who that was. Okay, he's going to be mad at me. It's okay. His name is Michael Simoff. He came to my presentation. It was a Friday before Memorial Day in 2005. And it was a big boardroom, and I was making this presentation. There's all these like skeptics in the room. And so the Tuesday after Memorial Day, he invited me to the Starbucks in the Sony building. And he sat me down. He said, listen, he says, you're never going to be able to raise this fund. Okay, and I'm telling you right now, this thing is dead on arrival. You should try to pick another business model. And then he went into the Easter Bunny, Harry Houdini, Santa Claus. Someone that was like the combination of those three people couldn't raise this fund. And I looked at him, I said, you know, I'm sorry, I'm gonna raise the fund. You know, people throw eggs and tomatoes at me all the time. I've got tons of haters. I mean, I could care less. I mean, you know, Yogi Bear had a great line, they don't boo nobody. So if someone's booing me, I must be doing something right, you know? If you're a Yankee in Fenway Park and you're batting 200, the crowd is like eating their hot dogs and shooting peanuts, right? But if you're A-Rod or Derek Jeter, they boo you. Okay, so that means it's a good sign, right? So to me, when I got the Citibank business, I said, guys, you guys are sitting on a gold mine. Okay, so I said, what we have to do is we have to sell this to the mass affluent. We can go to dentists and doctors and lawyers who know that they can't really invest in hedge funds because the minimums are too high, and we'll sell them $25,000 and $50,000 units of some of the best hedge fund managers in the world. And so, you know, sort of weirdly, I had started the SALT conference before I had bought that fund of funds. And so why did I start the conference? I thought I was going out of business. I thought I was going to become a third-party marketer, and I needed a conference business. So I got this conference business, and I'm buying this fund of funds, and people are like saying to me, well, those two things don't go together. What the hell are you doing? I said, but they do. Because what it'll do is the conference will raise the profile of the hedge fund industry, raise the profile of Skybridge, and it'll make it an acceptable company for the mass affluent to want to be investors in. And so my mistake was I got involved in politics.
Take us back now. Let's get into some politics for a few minutes. 2016, Donald Trump rising in the presidential race. Yeah. What made you decide you wanted to? You were backing some other candidates originally, I understand. And then
yeah, I laughed. I thought, I knew him well enough to know that I thought it was like a publicity stunt, right? So, one of my best stories with him is that I got invited by a mutual friend to have breakfast with him the morning after The Last Apprentice. And so I'm sitting in his office. He looks over at me. He says, wasn't I great last night? And I'm like, I didn't really see him, right? So he's like, you didn't see it? I said, no, I was watching Fox News. He goes, well, you were the only one. He goes, my ratings were fantastic. He does the whole thing, right? He says, but that's it, I'm running for president. I laughed. I said, you're not gonna run for president. I said, you're at like 2% in the polls. He goes, no, I'm at 2% of the polls because no one's believing I'm running. He goes, once I declare myself to run for president, I'm gonna shoot to the top of the polls, and I'm gonna stay at the top of the polls, and I'm gonna win the presidency. Which is more or less what he did, by the way. So I said, look, I'm already with Scott Walker. And then he was like, okay, well, after you leave Scott Walker, will you come work with me? And he goes, by the way, you don't have to give me any money. You're good on television. Just help me media surrogacy. I said, well, Mr. Trump, I'm loyal to my clients. A lot of my clients are with Jeb Bush, so I sort of have a promise to them. And he says, okay, if I kill Scott Walker and I kill Jeb Bush, will you come work for me? I said, yeah.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
I was on his fundraising team, and it was actually a lot of fun, but he also opened up my eyes to what's going on in our country. And so this is something like I don't feel super great about. I mean, it's not something I'm proud of, but I'll share it with you. I feel I should have seen what Mr. Trump saw. Because I grew up in this blue-collar family, lived in a blue-collar neighborhood, but my family was in the aspirational working class or the aspirational middle class, and the society was moving from that aspiration to economic desperation, and I didn't see it. I spent too much time with wealthy people. I spent too much time in fancy pants places, and I started to get the confirmed biases of the rich, which infected my worldview. And not just me, there were 17 or 18 establishment candidates that didn't see it either. I think really only Mr. Trump and Bernie Sanders saw it. So for me, it was a big eye-opener. It was like an epiphany on that campaign that, wow, a lot of people in our society are being left out. And so that's why Trump saw the Brexit, Trump saw the opportunity, with the blue-collar people. My fourth book I wrote was called The Blue-Collar President. That got everybody on the left crazy because they're like, this guy's like born with a golden toilet seat. He's obviously not blue-collar. And if you've ever seen Trump's apartment, if you think that Bellagio looks bad, Trump's apartment looks like Louis XIV smoked crystal meth and then decorated the apartment, right? I mean, never seen anything like this thing. So you're like, he's obviously not a blue-collar guy, right? But the point of the book was that he identified with and he gravitated blue-collar people to him. So I had a lot of fun on that campaign. And when he won, he put me on his transition team, which I was very honored to be. I was one of the executive committee members for his transition team, and then he named me the OPL director. But then Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon, they did the Washington two-step on me, and then I did the Washington two-step on them, and we all got blown out of the White House, and I'm here talking to you.
So how did you tell us about the call? Were you expecting to get an appointment in the White House?
No, I was just working, and then we won on Tuesday night, and I got named to the transition team on Friday, and then I started working on that, interviewing people, And then he said, do you want to work in the government? And I said no at that time. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, I could sell my company, I could go work for the government, and this is like a big part of the American dream. And I've had this great life in America, and if I could go work in the government and help the people that are growing up the way I grew up, like with better policies, I mean, that was like sort of the Jimmy Stewart, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I didn't realize how nasty and mean-spirited this group of people are that are living in Washington, so that's my fault. I have to own that as well. So, when they blocked me from that first job, I did the stupidest thing ever. I let my pride and my ego get to me. And when that happens, your emotions go up and your intelligence goes down. And I started making some mistakes, some really serious mistakes. So when Priebus and Bannon blocked me, I called President Trump. I said, these are bad guys. You trust me, you're going to want to get rid of these guys someday. And, he started to realize, like 6 months into his presidency, that they were leaking all over the place, and they were just like really bad guys. He called me, he said, come in here, help me fix it.
You've gone through your past, law school, business, finance, but you've never held a communications type role. What would you say to your critics who say he's never done anything like this and this is the White House?
I probably shouldn't have started my first day in the White House with a chainsaw and a hockey mask. I probably shouldn't have done that, right?
As it relates to me, I think that you will find in my background and my career, I have a lot of communications experience, and I spent a lot of time on television. I spent a lot of time shaping the message for my old firm, my predecessor firm, and so time will tell.
So you get the White House job, you're in the White House the first day. What do you want to do? Obviously, Trump put you in there because you told him they were leakers, and so you want to take care of that. So tell me what happens next.
So I'll take you back to the day before the first day. So it's 4:30 in the afternoon. It's July 20th, 2017. I'm in the study off the Oval Office with the president and Ivanka, and he looks at me and says, okay, I want you to come in and fix it. And so he looks at his watch. He says, we could make the announcement at 5 o'clock, but I'm a little tired. Can we do it tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.? Just be here at 10 a.m. I said, okay, no problem. And then I knew over that period of time, because of the way Washington works, it would leak out and there would be a firefight and all this other stuff. And so, of course, there was. And but then I got there at 9:30 in the morning. I met with Steve Bannon and Reince. That was a testy meeting. And by 10 o'clock, I was the comms director reporting directly to the president. So that was going to eventually cause a problem for the chief of staff, whoever the next chief of staff was going to be. And then the president turned to me and said, well, what do you want to do for the press secretary? Spicer just quit. And I said, well, let's promote Sarah. So he agreed to do that. He liked that idea. And then he said to me, do the press conference today. So I said, okay, no problem.
There's been some speculation in the press about me and Reince, so I just want to talk about that very quickly.
And then it started going downhill after that, because over the weekend there was the crossfire of, Priebus and Bannon's buddies in the media that were trying to rip me up or, hit me on the fact that I was selling my company to China, or all the nonsense that goes on in Washington. And so by that Monday, we were in a full-on battle. Game of Thrones, was the night watch. Okay, we were going off on each other. And then I made a mistake. There was a local kid whose father knew my dad for 50 years, an Italian-American. He grew up in a town next door to mine. Parents knew each other very well. I was getting to know him. I thought we were having an off-the-cuff, off-the-record conversation.
Who leaked that to you?
Oh man, I can't tell you that.
What's that?
I can't tell you that, but...
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I will eliminate everybody in the comms team and we'll start over. So, it's no problem. So I asked these guys not to leak anything and they can't help themselves, so we'll eliminate everybody.
No.
Okay, but you're an American citizen. This is a major catastrophe for the American country. So I'm asking you as an American patriot to give me a sense for who leaked.
The only thing I can tell you is two people in the White House who I know wouldn't lie to me, you know what I mean? Come on, I can't tell you about it. You know I can't do that.
I said a few locker room jocular things that I thought were funny.
And Reince is a paranoid schizophrenic, paranoiac. What he's going to do is, maybe Bill Shine's coming in, so let me leak the thing and see if I can block these people the way I blocked Scaramucci for 6 months. Okay, but he leaked the CFIUS stuff on me. My financial disclosure's been leaked to Politico,
Yeah,
which is a felony.
But I wanted to ask you, If you wanted to be profiled,
I don't want to be profiled. I'm not Steve Bannon.
what you're trying to do.
I'm not Steve Bannon.
No.
I'm not trying to suck my own. I'm not trying to build my own brand or strength the president. I'm here to serve the country.
He was giggling. It was funny. The next morning he called me and said, okay, so I got all of that on tape. And so he published the article, and I got exploded from the White House like an Austin Powers villain, and lost my job.
You remember better than I do. He was a disaster for the 11th.
And then the process of demonization and excoriation in the left-wing press took place on me. And then, and then the fun part of it, I got lit up on the late-night comedy scene and Saturday Night Live and all that other stuff. And so, listen, I would be dishonest if I told you that that stuff wasn't painful. You want to bring my personal life into it. My wife and I were going through some personal issues. She had filed for divorce on me, and I loved her, and I didn't really want to get divorced, but we were down that rabbit hole. I wrote a book called Hopping Over the Rabbit Hole, but I was descending into a personal rabbit hole, and so that was also very painful. So I had a lot of things going on at the same time that were not working. Some people were surprised that you would accept my invitation. So first thing I want to say is that thank you very much for accepting my invitation, sir. It's a big honor to have you here. And there's no grudges in sports and politics. And I got to tell you, I love your career, sir. I love your service to the country, and I couldn't be prouder than I am right now to share the stage with you. So I just want to say thank you.
Thanks for the offer. And what a lot of people don't know is since then we've kind of developed a friendship, and I appreciate the offer to be here.
Yeah, one of my mentors, Dan Sullivan, says sometimes when you set out to do something, the strategic byproducts are actually better than what you actually accomplish.
I agree with that. I mean, the conference would be a good example of that. So I'm interviewing John Kelly on stage, and so John fired me at the White House. You would think that that's a black and white situation, but it isn't. There was some gray there, and as I pointed out to people, I did something fireable, so I don't hold him responsible for my firing. The flip side of it is that I made a rookie mistake, not in a varsity baseball game, but in the 7th game, in the major leagues, in the 7th game of the World Series. And so I have to own that mistake. I made a mistake. It was a fireable mistake. But when you make mistakes, own the mistake and move on. But what you can't do when you're making a mistake, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, you can't wear a millstone of like woe and regret on your neck when you're making a mistake. You gotta relax. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna wake up in the morning and, oh man, I made a mistake and got me fired from the White House. Let me kick myself in the butt today. I'm not doing that. I'm going back to live my life. That's what an entrepreneur has to do. The mainstream media, when you first got the job, they portrayed you as this sort of patriot that was coming in to serve and to, quote unquote, protect the country from President Trump. Is that
that was an unfair characterization?
Yeah, was that how you approached the job? Yeah, tell us the truth.
It's the president. He's the elected president of the United States, ran on an agenda, and he's in the process of attempting to execute that agenda. My role, any staffer's role, was to help him do that. But I believe in the press. I did have one of them tell me, probably 6-8 weeks after I was at the White House, that you were our worst nightmare.
Right, because you're stopping them from getting all those leaks. I hope you don't mind me sharing this, because you said it in my office. There were probably like 1,000 or 1,200 articles that were written about you. Once they figured out that you were in a position to stop the leaks, they were rushing out stories to...
One of my staff people, I said, how many articles have been printed relative to something negative about me? And I was shocked. He said, well, about 1,000.
The White House experienced the ejection from the White House. Very, very tough in the beginning, but there was a big silver lining there. I was able to get back together with my wife, reconnect with my children, and we put our marriage back together. go back to my business. And so I sometimes tell people, it was a little bit like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. You know, I crashed the car on the bridge, I bumped my head, I'm in this alternative universe for 10 or 12 days, I'm blown to pieces, I'm like, oh my God, if I can just get back to my life. And so what ends up happening is when that happens to you, you have a greater appreciation for things that frankly you should have had a great appreciation for before you went through that disaster. So in some ways it's been very good. Yeah, I had anxiety. You know, I had I don't fit in anxiety. I had, okay, never seen the inside of a country club, never hit a tennis ball, never hit a golf ball. I wrote about in my book, Hopping Over the Rabbit Hole, that you have to deal with your anxiety. You have to relate to it. Don't submerge it, and don't be overly self-conscious. You know, you have to work through your self-consciousness, if you will, to get to where you want to go. Whatever it is that you want to do, you have to take risk. You have to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. So when we raised $300 million for Skybridge's first fund, I must have gotten $10 billion of no's. The great thing about sales, we can take it right back to the paper route, it's like a little bit like baseball, right? You go 3 for 10 in baseball, you're in the Hall of Fame. And so I could be the most phenomenal salesperson, and I go 3 for 10 every day. Okay, but then another guy comes in and he goes 6 for 10,000. He goes 6 for 10,000. Do you see how he is 100% better than me? My point being is that there's no batting average. You just have to get out there. And so one guy goes 3 for 10, he thinks he's good. The other guy goes 6 for 10,000, he's twice as good as that guy. Does that make sense?
We'll call that mooch math. I like it.
That's mooch madness, man. I don't know if it's math. It's like more like madness. You have to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. And so there were hundreds of times where I was pulling up to mansions, or I was going into a country club, or I was, oh man, you know, my shirt and trying to say the right thing. And then what ends up happening is each successive step, as you're starting to do well and people are starting to trust you and you're very competent, if you can marry your confidence to some level of competency, then you start really becoming successful. And then what happens is your self-confidence starts to build up, and you're like, okay, I can play, I can get in this competition and play and be successful. In so many different ways, you have such a big gift, particularly if you're born in the United States and whether you're born in a middle-class family or whatever. I mean, you're just lucky you're born in the United States. It is a gift, and it's an artistic gift. Okay, so you can it's like your life is like your canvas. You can paint on it, okay? And people can smell authenticity. You know, they don't be like everybody else. What do you need to be like everybody else for? I mean, that's not a lot of fun. Be yourself.
Imagine that fall from grace wasn't fun, but all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait a minute, there's nowhere to go but up. Like, it must have been amazingly freeing that people called you everything under the sun. So now it's like that, I got that, like, would be most people's worst fear. It's already over. The fear's gone. It happened.
You know, I got in trouble for cursing, right? I said a few curse words to a reporter. I thought we were off the record. He ran to CNN with the information. I got blown out of the door of the White House. Totally fine. I accept it. I'm totally accountable for it. I shouldn't have trusted the guy. But there's a scene after I've been fired, and the press is descending on my mom's house, right? My mom and dad's house. Small little blue-collar house. They're banging on the door. My mother opens the door and says, "Get the f*** off my property." I'm like, "Ma, you can't talk like that. That's what got me in trouble in the first place." You know what I mean? Point being is, you know, you grow up a certain way. What do you want me to tell you, right? Right? I said, "Ma, you can't talk like that. That's how I got fired from the White House," you know?
That's great.
But the point being is embrace it. What are you going to do? You're not going to be able to change it, but you should be able to embrace it and roll with it. I think that's my point to people, including this crisis. You're not going to be able to change it. And the worst thing you can do as a person is have self-pity or feel like a victim. You know, you got to just roll with it. It's life, man.